There is a version of you that shows up every day. It knows what to say. It knows how to stand, how to nod, how to hold its expression when the room expects calm. It has learned over years exactly how much of you is acceptable, and it offers that and nothing more. Most people around you have never noticed. Why would they? The performance is flawless. But you have noticed. Somewhere underneath all that fluency, underneath the seamless responses and the appropriate reactions, something is quietly waiting. Not restless exactly, not angry, just present, watching, wondering when, if ever, it gets to speak. This is not a crisis. It does not look like one from the outside. You are functional, you are liked. You are, by most measures, doing fine. And yet there is this persistent, low feeling like you are always slightly elsewhere. Like the person in the room is well rehearsed, but not quite real. You are not broken. You are not performing because something is wrong with you. You are performing because, somewhere along the way, it became the safest thing to do. There was someone who was very good at reading rooms. Not in a calculating way, it was almost instinctive. They would walk into a conversation and within seconds understand what was needed. A softer tone here, a little more confidence there. Enthusiasm when someone seemed to want energy, restraint when the moment called for quiet. People described them as easy to be around, adaptable, mature. They took this as a compliment because it was given as one. But at night sometimes, they would sit alone and feel a strange kind of tiredness that sleep did not fix. Not physical fatigue. Something more like the feeling after a long performance, not a bad one, but a performance nonetheless. A sense that the whole day had been spent translating themselves into a language that others could receive. They would try to remember a moment from the day when they had simply been, not adjusted, not curated, not managed, just present. And most days they could not find one. It was not that they were being fake. They genuinely cared about the people they were with. The adjustments were not manipulation. They were something older than that, more automatic. A habit so ingrained it no longer felt like a choice. The question that came to them slowly and quietly was this: if all of it was adaptation, then what exactly was being adapted? What was underneath all that careful shaping? Was there something there? Was there still a self? Carl Jung had a name for the face we show the world. He called it the persona, from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. He did not think the persona was something to be condemned. It is, in many ways, necessary. Every social creature learns to present differently in different contexts. You are not the same person at a job interview as you are at dinner with an old friend. You adjust. You read the situation. That is not deception. That is how people move through a world that has roles, expectations, an unspoken grammar of behavior that must be followed if you want things to go smoothly. The persona is useful precisely because it creates legibility. It smooths the friction of contact between people who do not fully know each other. In that sense, the mask is not the enemy of real connection. It is often the thing that makes connection possible in the first place. But Jung noticed something that went beyond the mask's usefulness. He noticed that for some people, the mask does not stay in the drawer when the day ends. It stays on through the evening, through the weekend, in the quiet conversations that are supposed to feel different from the public ones. And over time, slowly, the line between the mask and the person wearing it begins to blur. When that happens, the persona is no longer a tool you pick up and put down. It becomes a structure you live inside. and a structure built entirely on external feedback, on what others approve of, on what the room requires, on what has historically kept things peaceful, is a fragile and exhausting thing to inhabit, because it has no stable ground beneath it. It can only exist in relation to others. The moment the room changes, you have to change with it. The moment approval shifts, something in you shifts too. The person in our story was not lying to anyone. They were simply so skilled at adaptation that they had adapted themselves out of contact with their own interior. The mask had become the face. The translation had become the original. This is not a character flaw. It is often the result of early intelligence and early necessity. Children who are sensitive, perceptive, or raised in environments where moods shifted without warning learn quickly that reading the room is a form of survival. They learn that adjusting themselves, becoming smaller here, more cheerful there, more helpful, more quiet, more whatever is needed, keeps things smoother, safer, and they become very, very good at it. Good enough that it no longer feels like a strategy. It feels like simply who they are. The tragedy is not that they learned to adapt. The tragedy is that they forgot they were adapting at all. Here is what no one talks about. When you have spent years shaping yourself around others, you do not always know what you actually think. This is subtle. It does not announce itself as a problem. It does not feel like confusion exactly. It shows up in smaller, quieter ways, small enough to dismiss, but frequent enough over time to accumulate into something harder to ignore. Someone asks your opinion and you notice for a half second that you are waiting to sense what they want to hear before you answer. Not because you are dishonest, not because you are weak, but because the habit of gauging before speaking has become so automatic that you are doing it before you even realize it. The scan runs first. The opinion comes second, if it comes at all. Someone invites you to choose a restaurant and the question feels oddly paralyzing, not because you have no preferences, but because you have spent so long placing other people's preferences ahead of your own that the machinery for accessing your own has grown quiet from disuse. You have preferences. You are fairly sure you do. But when asked to surface one quickly, there is a strange blankness where the answer should be. Or there is this. You find yourself in a conversation, nodding along, and somewhere midway through you realize you are not sure if you agree with what you are agreeing to. You are nodding because nodding is smooth, because it keeps things moving, because disagreement, even mild, reasonable disagreement, would require a kind of friction that your whole system has been trained to avoid. And so the nod comes automatically, and you are only halfway aware of it, and afterward you are left with a vague dissatisfaction you cannot quite name. None of this is dramatic, that is the point. It is not a crisis you can identify and address. It is just a slow distance from yourself that compounds over time, a drift so gradual it can go unnoticed for years. And underneath it, if you sit still long enough to feel it, is something that might be called grief. Not grief for a person or a loss in the conventional sense. Grief for a version of yourself that was set aside so gradually and with such good intentions that you did not notice it happening until one day you looked for it and could not quite locate it. You went to reach for your own voice and found only the echo of other people's expectations. When did you stop having strong opinions? When did you stop taking up space? When did keeping the peace become more instinctive than being present? There may not be a single answer. These things rarely happen all at once. It probably happened the way most quiet losses do, slowly, then invisibly, and then so completely that you forgot there was ever anything different. Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of the self that do not fit the persona, and so are pushed below the surface of conscious life. The shadow is not a collection of shameful things, though people often assume it must be. It is simply everything that could not be accommodated by the mask. The ambitions that felt too large to admit, the anger that felt too threatening to express, the needs that seemed too demanding to voice, the preferences that were quietly overridden year after year in favor of what the room required. All of it not broken, just unacceptable to the social face, gets managed, softened, and stored somewhere below the threshold of daily awareness. The shadow does not ask to be dramatic, it simply accumulates. And here is what Jung understood with a clarity that still holds. What is pushed down does not disappear, it waits. It has patience that the conscious mind often lacks, and eventually it finds ways of making itself known, not through announcement, but through the texture of a life that has started to feel slightly off, in fatigue that arrives without clear cause, in irritability that seems disproportionate to whatever triggered it, in the low background hum of inauthenticity that you can only hear when everything else goes quiet, in the sudden and inexplicable exhaustion after a day that looked, from the outside, perfectly normal. Think of the person who is always agreeable. Over time, they begin to feel a resentment they cannot trace because they have agreed to so many things they did not fully choose that they can no longer distinguish the ones that cost them something. The resentment is not targeted, it is diffuse. It does not know where to land, and that makes it harder, not easier, to address. Think of the person who is always capable, always the one who handles things, who holds things together, who can be relied upon to manage whatever needs managing. They begin to feel a longing for rest that goes deeper than physical tiredness. A longing to be, for once, the one who does not have the answer. But the persona they have built does not allow for that. And so the longing stays underground, unspoken, growing heavier. Think of the person who is always warm, always generous with their attention, always present for others. They begin to notice, with a quiet alarm, a coldness inside them that does not match the image they have worked so hard to maintain. Not cruelty, just a kind of emotional depletion that the performance has never accounted for. A tank that has been drawn from repeatedly without being refilled. None of these are signs of dysfunction. They are signs of a shadow that has been patient long enough. They are the self, speaking in the only language available to it when the front door is always occupied. This is also worth naming. When the persona dominates, your sense of who you are becomes located outside yourself. You feel real when someone approves. You feel uncertain when they go quiet. Your identity becomes contingent. It requires constant external input to maintain its shape. Without that input, without the nods and the warmth and the confirmation, there is a hollow feeling that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not felt it. That is an enormous amount of weight to carry through a life. And the remarkable thing, the thing that makes it so hard to address, is that most people carry it without knowing they are carrying it at all. There is a moment that some people describe, often years into this pattern, sometimes decades, where something small happens that changes the texture of things. Not a revelation, not a collapse, just a hairline crack in the surface of the usual. It is almost never the thing you would expect. It is rarely a dramatic confrontation or a pivotal event. It is something ordinary. A conversation that went slightly off script. A question that for once received a real answer instead of a managed one. Maybe someone asked how they were doing and instead of fine, something honest came out. Not a confession, not a breakdown, just a small, genuine admission, something like tired actually, or I'm not sure anymore. a sentence that had not been approved by the performance before it arrived. And the feeling afterward was strange and unfamiliar. There was fear in it, the particular exposure that comes with saying something true before you have checked whether it is welcome. But beneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like relief, though relief seems too simple a word for it, more like a thinning of the air, a slight reduction in the constant low pressure of being managed. The person they said it to did not recoil. The room did not change. What happened was smaller and more significant than any dramatic outcome. Something real was offered, and the world received it without catastrophe. That in itself was almost disorienting, because the whole architecture of the performance had been built on the assumption that honesty was risky. And here the mask begins, quietly without ceremony, to loosen. Not because of a decision, not because someone gave advice or a revelation arrived or a turning point was reached, but because the cost of the performance had in that moment become fully visible, because the contrast between the managed version and the real one had been, however briefly, felt. And once that contrast is felt, once you have sensed the difference between the weight of the mask and the lightness of the moment without it, you cannot entirely unfeel it. That is how it begins, not with a change but with a noticing. Jung called the process of becoming oneself individuation. Not self-improvement in the common sense, not a better version of the same performance. Something more fundamental than that, a slow, interior movement toward wholeness, toward a life in which the parts of you that the mask could not contain are no longer permanently locked outside, not dramatized, not weaponized, just allowed back in. Individuation is not about dismantling the social self. The persona does not need to be destroyed. You will still walk into rooms and adjust your tone. You will still read the situation and respond accordingly. That is not the thing being questioned here. The question is whether you also have access to something that is not contingent on the room, whether there is a self beneath the adaptation that you can return to when the performance is done. This process does not look heroic from the outside. It rarely looks like anything at all. It is interior, slow, and unglamorous. It is the quiet practice of noticing what you actually feel before deciding what you are supposed to feel, of forming an opinion before checking whether it will be welcomed, of expressing a need before calculating whether it is appropriate, of tolerating in small increments the discomfort of being slightly unmanaged. This is not about becoming difficult. It is not about abandoning care for others. Consideration is not the problem. The problem is when consideration becomes a one-way street, when you are always the one adapting, always the one folding yourself smaller so the room can remain comfortable, and when this happens so automatically that it no longer registers as a choice. The shadow does not ask to be dramatized. It does not ask for total liberation. It asks, in most cases, for something much more modest. To be acknowledged, to have a small amount of room, to not be treated as an emergency every time it surfaces. There is something in Jung's thinking that is easy to overlook because it sounds simple. The goal is not to become a different person. The goal is to become a more complete version of the person you already are, to stop spending so much energy maintaining the gap between what you feel and what you show. To let the interior and the exterior move a little closer together. Not perfect alignment, that is neither possible nor desirable, but less distance. Less of the constant low-level work of managing the self into an acceptable form. Because that work has a cost. It has always had a cost. The tiredness at the end of a day in which nothing went wrong is the cost. The difficulty accessing your own preferences is the cost. The The vague resentment, the hollow feeling when approval stops, the sense of being slightly elsewhere even in your own life, all of that is the cost. And the extraordinary thing is that for most people, it never fully surfaces as a question. The performance simply continues, growing more efficient with each passing year, until the gap between the mask and the face beneath it becomes so normalized that it no longer registers as a gap at all. What Jung offers is not a solution. It is a way of seeing, a lens through which the exhaustion makes sense. A framework in which the hollow feeling is not a sign that something is broken, but a signal from the parts of you that have been waiting patiently, persistently, for the performance to slow down long enough to be heard. What if you are not acting because something is wrong with you? What if you are acting because you became very good, very early, at surviving rooms that required it? And what if the exhaustion you feel, that quiet, formless fatigue at the end of days that should feel fine, is not a symptom of weakness, but a signal from the parts of you that were set aside and that are still patiently there? You do not have to perform your way out of performing. There is no dramatic moment required, no confession, no rupture, no reinvention. Those things make for compelling stories, but they are rarely how real change moves. Real change in the interior life tends to move the way water moves through stone, slowly, without announcement, wearing something down by returning to the same place again and again. Only the slow, quiet recognition that there is a difference between you and the version of you that the world has come to expect, and that both of those things can exist at the same time without one destroying the other. The social face and the real one, the mask and what is underneath it. They do not have to be enemies. The mask is not your enemy. It was, at some point, a solution to something real. It may still be useful in certain rooms. The point is not to throw it away. The point is to remember that you are the one wearing it. But you are not the mask. And the part of you that knows the difference, that has always known the difference, even when it was too inconvenient to acknowledge, that part does not need fixing. It just needs you to remember it is there. That is enough. For now, that is enough.